What drives a servant to cross the sacred boundaries between master and maid, knowing full well the consequences that await? In the shadowed halls of Graston Manor, where velvet gowns hang like forbidden fruit and mirrors reflect dreams never meant for common eyes, one kitchen maid's hunger for beauty would lead to a punishment most peculiar. This is not a tale of whips or chains, but of something far more insidious, a torment that would leave her pride shattered and her spirit forever changed. My name is Elara, and for 5 years, my world has been confined to the lower levels of Graston Manor, the bustling, steamy kitchens, the echoing laundry rooms, and the narrow shared sleeping quarters with the other maids. My days were a rhythm of scrubbing, cleaning, and serving, my hands rough, my clothes plain. Yet, within me, a secret longing bloomed, a yearning for the elegance and grace I witnessed in Lady Annalise, the mistress of the manor. Lady Annalise was like a vision descended from a tapestry. Her silken gowns whispered as she moved. Her laughter was like the tinkling of a hidden spring, and her hands, so delicate and pale, seemed never to have known a day of toil. I would catch glimpses of her in the grand hallways, a fleeting scent of lavender and rosewater trailing behind her, and a sigh would escape my lips, a silent acknowledgement of the vast chasm that separated our lives. One afternoon, while dusting, in the long gallery, a space filled with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, I noticed a discarded gown draped carelessly over a chair. It was Lady Annalise's, a magnificent thing of deep sapphire velvet, its hem embroidered with silver, thread that shimmered even in the dim light. It looked as though it had been cast off in a moment of pique. An impulse, sudden and reckless, seized me. The gallery was deserted, the rest of the household busy with their afternoon tasks. I glanced around nervously, then reached out and touched the velvet. It felt impossibly soft beneath my calloused fingers. A daring thought sparked in my mind. Just for a moment, what would it be like to feel that fabric against my skin? To see my reflection in the tall mirrors as something other than a grubby maid? With trembling hands, I slipped out of my own simple linen dress. The velvet felt cool and heavy as I pulled it over my head. It was far too large, the bodice loose, the hem pooling around my bare feet. But as I looked at myself in the long mirror at the end of the gallery, a strange transformation seemed to occur. The rich blue deepened the color of my eyes, and the elegant cut of the gown lent me a poise I had never known. For those few stolen moments, I was not Elara, the kitchen maid. I was a lady. I even dared to practice a few of Lady Annalise's gestures, a delicate lift of an imaginary fan, a graceful turn. The silence of the gallery became my grand ballroom, and the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams were my admiring courtiers. But my moment of borrowed grandeur was not to last. As I turned from the mirror, lost in my fantasy, I saw a figure standing in the doorway at the far end of the gallery. It was Mrs. Higgins, the manor's sharp-eyed housekeeper, her face a thundercloud of disapproval. Mrs. Higgins was a woman who ran the household with an iron fist. Nothing escaped her notice, and she had a particular disdain for any servant who dared to step out of their assigned place. Her silence was often more terrifying than her words, and the look on her face at that moment sent a shiver of dread down my spine. I tried to speak, to stammer out an explanation, but Mrs. Higgins simply raised a hand, her expression glacial. "Not a word, girl," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You will come with me." I quickly shed the velvet gown, my hands clumsy with fear, and scrambled back into my own dress. The magic of the moment had vanished, replaced by a cold, hard knot of apprehension in my stomach. Mrs. Higgins led me not to the kitchens as I had expected, but to a small, rarely used room near the main hall. It was a bright, airy space, but the atmosphere felt heavy with unspoken threat. Lady Annalise was already there, seated in a delicate chair by the window, her expression a mixture of surprise and something akin to amusement. Lord Graston stood beside her, his brow furrowed. "Mrs. Higgins tells us you were found arrayed in one of my gowns, Elara," Lady Annalise said, her voice calm but with a hint of steel beneath. I could only hang my head, shame burning in my cheeks. What could I say? That I was foolish? That I had let a silly dream carry me away? Lord Graston cleared his throat. "Such behavior cannot be tolerated. It undermines the order of the household. It breeds improper notions." I braced myself for a harsh scolding, perhaps even a docking of my meager wages. But what followed was entirely unexpected. Lady Annalise rose from her chair, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I believe a simple reprimand will not suffice, Thomas," she said to her husband. "This calls for a more memorable lesson." She turned to me, and a strange glint appeared in her eyes. "Elara," she said, her voice almost playful, "I hear you have a particular sensitivity." My brow furrowed in confusion. What did she mean? Mrs. Higgins stepped forward, a knowing look on her face. "The girl is quite ticklish, my lady, severely so." A wave of mortification washed over me. It was true. I had always been terribly ticklish, a fact that my fellow servants sometimes used to tease me in our rare moments of shared laughter. It was a silly weakness, something I tried to hide. How had Lady Annalise come to know this? Lady Annalise smiled, a thin, almost predatory curve of her lips. "Indeed. It seems we have found a unique way to impress upon Elara the importance of respecting boundaries." Lord Graston looked bewildered. "Tickling? Annalise, are you serious?" "Perfectly," she replied, her gaze never leaving mine. "It will be instructive and quite unforgettable, I assure you." 2 strong footmen were summoned. Before I could fully grasp what was happening, they gently but firmly took hold of my arms. Lady Annalise approached, a delicate smile still playing on her lips. "Now, Elara," she said softly, her fingers light as feathers as she reached towards my sides. "Let us see just how much you enjoyed pretending to be a lady." A giggle escaped my lips before I could stop it, a nervous, involuntary reaction. But as her touch became more insistent, the giggles turned into gasps and then into helpless bursts of laughter. The sensation was maddening, a ticklish fire that spread through my entire body, leaving me weak and breathless. This was not the swift, sharp pain of a whipping. It was something far more unsettling, a loss of control, a forced surrender to a ridiculous, overwhelming sensation. My face flushed, tears streamed from my eyes, and I begged them to stop. But Lady Annalise's fingers danced relentlessly, exploring every vulnerable spot. The laughter that erupted from me was not joyous. It was frantic, desperate, laced with a rising tide of humiliation. I was being reduced to a helpless, squirming child, my dignity stripped away with every uncontrollable shriek and gasp. This was the punishment for daring to dream beyond my station. This peculiar torment, devoid of physical harm, was somehow far more effective, leaving me exposed and utterly powerless in a way that a harsher beating might not have. As the laughter finally subsided, leaving me weak and trembling, Lady Annalise stepped back, her expression unreadable. "I trust," she said, her voice cool and even, "that you have learned a valuable lesson, Elara. The world of ladies and maids are separate for a reason. Do not forget it again." I could only nod. My body still twitching from the lingering sensation, my spirit bruised and chastened in a way I could never have anticipated. The velvet gown, the stolen moments of fantasy in the silent gallery, now seemed a distant, foolish dream, the price of which I had just paid in full. But as I lay in my narrow bed that night, the memory of the laughter still echoing in my ears. A new, unsettling feeling began to stir within me. It was not just shame. It was something darker, something akin to resentment. The peculiar punishment, while not physically scarring, had unearthed a different kind of wound, a deep, simmering humiliation that might, in time, take root and blossom in unexpected ways. What happens when a maid is punished not with pain, but with a torment that robs her of her very composure? The answer, I suspected, was a story far from over. Of course, here is the second and final part of the story, continuing from the aftermath of Elara's peculiar punishment. In the weeks that followed, a profound change settled over me. Outwardly, I became the model of a perfect servant. My movements were quiet and efficient, my eyes always respectfully downcast. I performed my duties with a silent diligence that earned nods of approval from even the formidable Mrs. Higgins. The other servants, seeing my subdued nature, assumed my spirit had been broken by the humiliating ordeal. They were wrong. The humiliation had not broken me, it had forged me into something new, something hard and sharp. The laughter in the kitchens, once a source of camaraderie, now sounded like a distant echo of my own forced, helpless giggles. I retreated into myself, becoming an observer, a ghost in the halls of Graston Manor, my resentment, a cold, secret ember glowing in my chest. Lady Annalise, it seemed, was entirely convinced that her unforgettable lesson had been a resounding success. Believing she had tamed my rebellious spirit and replaced it with unwavering obedience, she made a decision that would alter the course of both our lives. She promoted me. I was to become her personal handmaiden, a position of immense trust, responsible for her chambers, her wardrobe, and her most private moments. She saw my new, silent demeanor as proof of my reformed character. It was a mistake she would come to regret. Being in her private chambers was like stepping into another world. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes. The wardrobes overflowed with gowns of silk and velvet, and jewels glittered on the vanity. At first, I was simply an attendant, laying out her clothes, drawing her bath, brushing her long, silken hair. I watched her every move, listened to her every sigh, my mind a quiet, whirring machine, filing away details. It was then that I began to notice the inconsistencies in her perfect life. There were letters delivered not by the usual footman, but by a cloaked messenger who would arrive at the garden gate at twilight. Lady Annalise would read these letters with a mixture of excitement and fear, her hands trembling slightly before she would burn them in her fireplace, watching until they were nothing but ash. There were also the headaches, sudden afflictions, that would require her to take long, solitary rides in her carriage late at night, from which she would return in the early hours of the morning, her face flushed and her eyes bright with a secret energy. My curiosity, once a childish yearning for a beautiful dress, was now a cold, calculated hunger for the truth. As her handmaiden, I had opportunities I never had before. One evening, while she was at dinner, I feigned an illness and remained in her chambers. I searched. Hidden in a small secret compartment in her jewelry box beneath a false bottom, I found what I was looking for. It was a single, unburned letter. The words on the page were a revelation. It was a passionate, treasonous love letter, not from her husband, but from the Duke of Althorn, Lord Graston's most powerful and bitter political rival. The letter spoke of secret meetings, of shared plans to undermine the Duke's court influence, and of a love that defied their stations and their marriages. I held the proof of her betrayal in my hand. This single piece of paper could destroy her, her husband, and the entire house of Graston. The power I felt in that moment was a heady, intoxicating thing, far more potent than the feel of velvet on my skin. I carefully folded the letter and hid it in the bodice of my own plain dress. The next evening, I chose my moment. I was helping Lady Annalise prepare for a grand ball. She was sitting at her vanity, admiring her own reflection, a vision of beauty in a gown of shimmering gold. "You've been a very good girl, Elara," she said, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror. "So quiet and obedient. I knew you had it in you." I curtsied, my expression a perfect mask of humility. "You taught me a very valuable lesson, my lady," I said, my voice soft and even. "You taught me that a person's greatest weakness is often the one they try hardest to hide, the one that, when touched, can make them lose all control." She smiled, pleased. "Indeed, a lesson well learned." I picked up a heavy, silver-backed brush and began to stroke her hair, my movements slow and deliberate. "For me," I continued, my voice a low whisper, "it was my ticklishness. A silly, childish thing, but you found it and you used it to remind me of my place." Her smile faltered slightly in the reflection. She did not like to be reminded of the specifics of that day. "I have often wondered, my lady," I went on, my voice as soft as silk, "what your greatest weakness might be. What is the one thing that, if touched, would make your perfect composure shatter into 1,000 pieces?" She stiffened, her eyes narrowing in the mirror. "That is enough, Elara." I leaned in closer, my lips near her ear, my voice barely a breath. "I think," I whispered, "it is your correspondence with the Duke of Althorn." The color drained from her face. Her perfect, poised reflection seemed to crumble before my very eyes. She spun around, her hand flying to her throat, her eyes wide. With a terror and helplessness I recognized intimately. It was the same look I had seen in my own reflection on that humiliating day. "You," she stammered. "How?" I did not have to show her the letter. She could see the truth in my eyes. In that moment, the sacred boundary between master and maid, the one she had so cruelly reinforced, dissolved into nothing. My revenge was not to expose her. That would have been too simple, too quick. My revenge was to become her keeper. From that day on, the dynamic in the manor shifted. I remained her handmaiden, performing my duties with the same quiet efficiency. But now, when our eyes met, there was a new understanding. I was the guardian of her secret, the silent master of her fate. She was the lady of the manor, but she was my prisoner, trapped in a cage of her own making. The story of the maid who wanted to portray a lady had a strange, ironic ending. I had learned that true power wasn't found in a velvet gown or a grand title. It was found in the quiet, hidden spaces between words, in the secrets people kept locked away. My peculiar punishment hadn't taught me to respect my station. It has taught me how to master it.